This is the Agoro Carbon Farming Podcast. Agoro Carbon Alliance is taking action on a global scale to reverse the effects of climate change by decarbonizing farming and restoring carbon to the world's soil. On this podcast, we're going to explore carbon farming from the soil to the atmosphere and how it affects everyone in between. To learn more, visit us at agorocarbonalliance.com. Hey, thanks for joining another edition of the Carbon Farming Podcast. And we are here to raise your knowledge about what is this carbon marketplace and how is farming involved in it and what does it mean to you? And we have a couple great guests. So far we've talked to Alex Bell and Anastasia Pavlovic that talked about why we got into the carbon marketplace with the Agoro Carbon Alliance. We've talked to Devin Moon, who's a grower that's been involved and why he got involved. And today we have a couple great guests with us. They're actually Agoro employees that have been with us for not quite a year yet, Travis Kidd and Mark Warner. And they have some unique perspectives as they come into this Agoro Carbon Alliance as employees of Agoro and working with growers and ranchers out there. Travis is out of Texas and has a lot of background in ranching and sorghum farming. And Travis, where'd you go to school?
I went to Texas A&M and studied agronomy. And I was really heavy into sorghum, as a biofuel stock, and studying that. And I wanted to know everything there was to know about biofuel, but that's what they, when you start wanting to study biofuels, you're studying agronomy, and built a passion for it. And then what do you know? You're an agronomist, getting out there and getting dirty and studying everything that there is to know about the environment and the things that, play a role in farming, ranching, and it's how to make money off the land,
You bring up a key point, and we'll ask you, Travis, and then we'll do an introduction to Mark and ask him the same question. But as an agronomist, you're out there, you're a PCA or a CCA or both, and you're killing bugs and you're putting on fertilizers and trying to grow things and that sort of thing. Why get involved in this carbon marketplace? It doesn't seem like that is in line with being an agronomist.
Mark, go ahead.
So I'll be honest, I kind of stumbled into this. You have to really rewind back into my career till about 2018. And my history of how I wound up in agriculture, my family used to farm and sold out in the 80s and early 90s. And I really didn't see this as a career path until I graduated in 2008. And the market had crashed and job outlooks were pretty poor. And the Ohio State Ag College had 99 to 100% job placement in 2008, 2009, despite, the economic state of that. So a good family friend of mine owns an independent single location ag retail business. And he had kind of tipped me off that this would be a good direction to go towards. And long story short, I went to Ohio State, got a degree in agronomy, worked at a co-op for a short period of time, then sold seed for about 6 years and moved into the crop protection world, selling chemistry, fungicide, seed treatment, insecticide, herbicide, anything sprayable, and was really doing fine there. But really in those years, my brother-in-law had purchased some acreage and he owns a cover crop seed business. And we just kind of started farming together and implementing a lot of the practices that we are encouraging here at the Agoro Carbon Alliance to fix soil carbon into the soil. So strict no-till, planting into, big giant green cover crops, things that are very unorthodox from what is normal, in today's ag climate. And I really just started to become passionate about this no-till space and the cover crop space. And I started to pay attention to more of these growers that have been doing these things for long periods of time and just really saw a resilience and a difference in that type of farming, although it is a very small percentage of what's going on in agriculture. So I really can't take credit for the spark of interest into this. My brother-in-law kind of set the stage there for me, but it kind of quickly became a passion of mine. And this job at the Agoro Carbon Alliance has really been kind of a crash collision of my personal beliefs and also my professional experiences up to this point. So I can honestly say it's the most fun I've had since I've been working is being in this space. And I'm really, really enjoying the message that we're putting out. So that's my story.
Well, Mark, let me ask you this question. As a grower, you started implementing some of these practices like no-till, cover cropping. Did you do that with the expectation that you were going to get into the carbon marketplace as a grower? You did it because it was healthy for the land and the soil, right?
Yeah. And if anything, I went into that with a level of skepticism because the acreage that we were farming at that time was strictly my brother-in-law's. So I was more or less just helping out because I love running equipment. I love being around crops and agriculture, and I know agronomics. So I mean, I was more or less lending a helping hand. And he would say, we're going to plant a 15-way cover crop mix, and then we're going to let it get 4 foot tall, and then we're going to no-till into it. And I'm thinking to myself, geez, man, this is nuts. Like, we're going to have all these problems. There's no way this is going to work. And then it would work. And he would start taking me to other growers and see what they were doing on their farms. And I just started to see, okay, there is a different way to do things. And what are we gaining? What is different with this process from what was the norm that I was exposed to in selling inputs over the last 8-9 years? And it's really fascinating. I mean, there's a resiliency, and their soil health is a topic that I feel is really becoming rejuvenated. And there's a lot of hype right now, a lot of talk around it, but it's something that, you think about industrial agriculture and how long we've been doing it, and you look at soil health and realize how little we know about this. It's exciting that it's here now, but it's also fascinating that we're this far along in agriculture and have the limited resources and knowledge that we do about soil health. So yeah, it's a fascinating and exciting time to be in the industry.
Just to back up what Mark said, when I was a young agronomist, just starting, you go to these field days where they're showing you these experiments, and I'm looking at them, and the seasoned agronomists were always trying to answer a few questions. And I always thought to myself, well, we already know this, but no, we don't. That was kind of the point. There's so much unknown about this year versus last year. You can always say, oh, well, this is no 2012. This is no 2008, and then when you go back and think about what the conditions were like, they're unique each year. So as an agronomist and as a research agronomist, our jobs are to, reduce the variability within our testing regime so that you can answer questions. But the environment plays such a large role in that it makes it difficult and unique each year. But, Mark is talking about, getting cover crops up 4 foot tall. And in the environment in which I work, one location would think that is a really great idea. Let's get some ground cover. And then another would think it's absolutely crazy. You couldn't be able to terminate just because of the growing conditions. To give a little background, I was mowing my yard up until the new year, all, past Christmas. So, when you start thinking about farming there and practicing reduced tillage or no-till, our growers in this area of the world near Houston, they're bedding up really, really tall, hipping really high, just so they can get water off of the field, which is, in West Texas, is a crazy idea to get water off the field. You want it to stay on there as long as possible so that you can get that infiltrated. It's pretty fun to go out and send a few messages about the carbon market. And really, we kind of lay the seed, if you will, a pun intended. We lay a little seed
yes.
of curiosity. And we talk to growers and retail agronomists. We lay that little seed, and then it starts to grow in the back of their mind, and they start to think a little differently. And so as agronomists, we're there to help, but we're not there to tell people how to farm. We're there to get people thinking so that they can experiment.
Uh-huh.
I'm a big proponent for on-farm research. And, a lot of people will say, not on my ground, not on my ground, right? It's the classic phrase. It's like, well, what does work on your ground? Let's look and let's experiment.
I think then here's the next question for both of you. We'll start with you, Travis, and then go to Mark. You are both grew up and educated as a traditional agronomist, where you're going out and advising clients on whether it's how to kill things or whether it's how to grow things and fertilize things and help their soil become healthy. And then there's this whole component of the carbon marketplace. This is, Yeah, I mean, Mark, you mentioned that you started doing these things with your brother-in-law because they were the right thing to do for soil health and sustainability and long-term productivity. And then all of a sudden, there's this carbon marketplace thing in there that is not typically thought of. Travis, how did you find out about the carbon marketplace, and how did you start down the line to eventually come to work for Agoro?
Yeah, well, I've got contacts throughout the seed industry. My background is in sorghum genetics and hybrid development. So I spent a lot of my time speaking with, like trying to be a liaison, if you will, between the university and seed companies. And my big mission was, hybrid development so that we can produce more grain with less water.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from an arid environment, it was about moisture. We got to be able to produce more with less, and let's get that piece figured out. And then, having contacts in the industry, I kind of got pushed the same way Mark did. Hey, you really want to look into this. This is something that's on the Wild West, if you will. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the Wild West, and it was explained to me. This is consumer driven. As consumers, both all the way across, between the two oceans, people want to know that they're buying something that is sustainable. And people are starting to notice that, there may be more extreme weather, and it may be that we talk about it a little bit more in the media. However, I've asked some senior agronomists, and they said, well, the weather pattern is a little bit different from what it was in the 60s and 70s, just a little bit. They're like, we feel like there's a little shift. So there's something here. And, based on where you stand politically, that could be a very big statement to make wherever you're at in agriculture. But we still agree the weather is a little off and a little weird. But when you're producing cattle and you're producing a crop in an arid environment, I still go back to the topic of water and where that plays a role. It's a consumer-driven market. So when people go to the grocery store or they go and buy clothing, they want to know that it was produced in a sustainable way. And those consumers are wanting to see that. They want to see either a logo or an emblem that reminds them that they're doing something good as well. And it's buying from a producer that's doing the right thing or has adopted the right practices to essentially be sustainable. Now, from the producer's standpoint, sustainability may be something totally different, like being able to hand the farm off to the next generation. That would be sustainable to that grower's mind. And working in the seed industry, coming in and trying to sell them something, and say, hey, this is sustainable. That's not always a really good, fun conversation, because then all of a sudden everything's sustainable.
Yeah.
So you can get caught up in the woodwork very quickly there. But the carbon market, it's a carbon crop. So you're going to be able to take your carbon crop from your property to the market and get a market value for that, just like they could do with cattle, grain, fiber.
What about you, Mark? As you ventured into farming a little bit differently, how did you become aware that there was an opportunity in the carbon marketplace to make money, or that there was even a marketplace out there?
I'm trying to think back on maybe when I first heard the concept, and I won't say the name, but I remember one of our competitors that's been out for several years, and I remember hearing them, and it was just really gray. There was a couple growers in the area that had signed up with that company, and you heard of a lot of turnover, and just it was a very muddled. And honestly, at that time, I looked at it as a man who would take a job in that industry. I was seeing people on for a year and let go, and then I didn't see a safe environment, let's say, in the carbon market. So I guess how this kind of came to me is I have a good friend who also works for Agoro, Alex Fyock, and he was working for the Soil Health Partnership. And we talk once a week. We'd worked together years earlier, and I always had told him, hey, if the Soil Health Partnership ever expands into Ohio, let me know. I would love to be a part of this message of no-till and cover crops and soil health. And that organization actually ended up getting dissolved earlier this year. And Alex is the one who discovered Yara and their pursuit into the carbon markets and brought it to my attention and said, hey, look into this. So I honestly applied with a level of skepticism, thinking back to other players in the industry and how unsecure it had seemed. But then when I started talking to people in Yara and saw how far out their vision is, not that it's, we're going to try to see if this can work over the next year or two. Yara is looking 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead. And I thought, well, if this company is willing to go into this space, I had a level of confidence to jump out of my comfort zone and come on board, really only understanding the agronomics, not really understanding the carbon market. Personally, I was fortunate to be asked to speak about the markets in front of a large group of people here not too long ago. And I really went down a several-month journey of trying to bridge my gap of, hey, I know the agronomics, but I need to learn why this is here. What is this? What's it look like? Why is it here? And where is it going? And I am so thankful that I was asked to do that, because my level of understanding of this market has just exploded over the last couple of months, and my enthusiasm behind it has exploded too, because now I have a more clear picture of what this industry looks like. And I have confidence that there's only one direction it's going to go, and it's up.
Mark, what are one or two of the biggest things that you learned as you were researching for this talk that you gave?
So Travis touched on one of them. The driving factors is what I think is truly extremely interesting and really clears all doubt of where this market's heading. And then the biggest one, like Travis said, is public perception. About a year ago, there was a survey done that I found some numbers on. And the UN had sent out this survey to a bunch of people over a bunch of different countries. And the numbers that I found were that like 1.2 million people had responded to this survey, and that 64% believed that climate change was real and that urgent change was needed. So you've got a general customer base out there, the general public, and the vast majority realize the problem and see the problem. Like Travis said, more and more people are looking out the window and saying, look, something's different. And another great point, like Travis brought up, is, when we start talking about the environmental side of this, it's very easy for, it's only natural, myself included. I had to challenge myself to try to get my biases out of the way when I started learning about this. But politics come to mind. Yep. You start talking about emissions and CO2 and regulation and what's going to happen, instantly our minds go to politics. And anymore in today's day and age, next what happens is our emotions come to the table. So it's hard, I think, and rightfully so, and understandably hard to come to this from a neutral understanding and say, okay, I'm going to take this information at face value and learn about these markets. But public perception is one, but something that's very unique right now in this industry is the level of commitment that's coming forward from these corporations, the size, the industries that are coming forward and saying, look, we're going to be net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050. You've got, large oil producers, automotive manufacturers, airline industries. I mean, these aren't little companies. These are billion and billion dollar companies that are saying, look, we're going to put tens of millions, billions of dollars into infrastructure change, and we're going to be carbon neutral. And the only two ways they're going to do that is by becoming more efficient and using renewable energy or buying offsets. And we know right now, I mean, as it sits, are we able to use solar, wind, hydro power to fuel all of our energy needs? As it sits today, probably not. So what else is on the table to achieve net zero? Buying offsets. So right now, with the players out there and the level of acres on board, there's going to be, there's a huge shortage for one, as far as supply of these credits, with a pile of people coming to the table saying, hey, we're going to play ball and buy this. So to me, I mean, looking at it from a holistic, big picture standpoint, the stage is set. We just have to figure out the rules.
Travis, I think you mentioned it, Mark, before we started recording, brought up an example that this is all consumer driven, and the corporations are getting on board. You log into Google, you just type in google.com, and what does it say? I mean, it doesn't say a whole lot. There's a lot of white space on Google's homepage, but on the very bottom, it says they're carbon neutral. Mark, you mentioned that you got on a flight. What was the story you were telling me about getting on a flight the other day?
So that's an interesting tale, kind of both. Well, I guess there's two stories there. I was just booking some flights to go to Commodity Classic here in a couple weeks, and on the flights listed, it's telling you this plane is 22% more efficient or 10% less efficient, and what the estimated CO2 emissions are going to be out of that flight. So they're giving that consumer the idea to say, well, hey, this flight's $10 more, but it's 22% more efficient. I'm going to buy that because my money's going to, helping the environment, helping this issue. The other flight story, I guess I hadn't mentioned, but I went to Spokane, Washington in early December to a wheat growers convention. And this is what really one of the pivotal moments, I guess, in my time here, where it showed me what the difference in public perception around the space. And when I was selling seed, for example, and I'd talk to somebody that didn't know agriculture, one of the first questions they would ask is, do you sell GMOs? And the general consumer is not attached to agriculture anymore, and they don't understand that space. So you have to explain it. And then when I went to crop protection, the first question I'd get when I told them what I did is I sold herbicides and crop protection. They would say, well, do you sell glyphosate? So most industries I've worked in, when you try to talk to somebody about what you do, you're instantly defending yourself from a general public that does not understand the industry. And I sat next to an individual between Denver and Spokane, and when we just got to talking and conversation, and he asked me what I did, I said, I'm an agronomist and I work in the carbon markets. And this guy just lit up. And we had a conversation for that entire flight about agriculture in general, sustainability. And he was just baffled and amazed that a company is willing to hire a team and try to strengthen our food system and find some type of solution. So, that's a firsthand scenario where I've seen it. But then also it's everywhere you look, whether you're booking flights or you get a package from Amazon. I mean, you're seeing this net zero carbon neutral statement about everywhere you look. Once you start paying, once you've looked into the market, it seems to pop up in front of you every day. Whereas before I was in the carbon space, maybe I wasn't, paying attention to it as much, but it's definitely out there every day.
Yeah. Travis, we have come to a point, we know that the practices that we're asking the growers to do is beneficial agronomically. And now you're working for Agoro and you're going out there and trying to help growers monetize that and sell some of the carbon that they're capturing by doing the right thing and doing good stuff with their farming practices. What misinformation is out there? What do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions that you hear from growers when you first meet them about the carbon marketplace?
Typically, what I find is news that is about 2 to 3 years old. Within you go to a meeting, it's a little dated, and maybe numbers are off, or there's a perception that there may be free money involved. Mm-hmm. And being from Texas, I like to have that vocabulary correct. It's like, whoa, that's not free money. We're going to purchase something from you. And so we are purchasing your soil carbon. You always have to talk to, if your dad asks you a question, you got to prove it to him, right? And he was always my hardest sell. If I was trying to sell him grain sorghum or sorghum Sudan grass, we had to really talk about this, speaking the wisdom of a particular choice, and he's like, well, it's my pocketbook. Yeah. So he gets to make the ultimate say on that. But the carbon market, what are we doing? Well, essentially we're agreeing to adopt a new practice. So if you heard Mark earlier, he's saying, we're looking at the top 5,000 companies in the world. And these are the players, not just the Fortune 500s, but the top 5,000. And they've essentially said, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint, correct? And as a result, typically those numbers are really overzealous sometimes. But what they have to do in order to purchase a carbon credit from a grower is they have to adopt a new practice themselves. And so Yara has also done this as well. So we talk about green ammonia, green urea, and looking at creating a vessel that is fully autonomous and works off of hydrogen cells. So there's a big practice there to reduce emissions, right? However, we're looking at Yara just as an individual, they still have more to reduce. And so what they do is they're going to purchase that from the open market. And where it gets really hairy is this is a free market, right? It's an open and free market. And it's essentially, table to table, over the table business transaction where it's not a mandated. So currently this is unmandated territory. So it is the Wild West. So it's just, business to business transaction. So the producer agrees to adopt a practice and then therefore can create a carbon credit that the buyer adopted a practice and now can purchase that credit. So both parties have to play in that and do so. One adopts a sustainability practice and can now proceed to create. One adopts a sustainable practice and can purchase. But that's one of the big perceptions that I get from the market is, well, there's free money, and it's not. We're purchasing a crop, a carbon crop.
Mark, let's say that I'm a field crop farmer out in the Midwest. Let's say I have 20,000 acres, and I heard something about a carbon market, how I can make money in this carbon market, and I get your name from somewhere. We'll tell you specifically where you can get Mark and Travis's name here in just a little bit before we end. But I got your name, and I call you up, and I say, okay, Mark, this sounds too good to be true. How can I make more money doing what I'm already doing? And you're going to pay me. You're going to do what? Explain to me how this program works.
One of the first questions, it usually comes up in the conversation, but they usually throw out a number. And I would say that from a misconception standpoint, from what I hear is the fish grows in the retelling, right? So what was a certain dollar amount becomes double that dollar amount, becomes triple that dollar amount. Before you long, you have guys calling you saying, well, I heard I can make $100 an acre. In today's market, probably not. Where will this carbon market will go? Maybe someday, who knows? But yeah, I guess I try to just paint a picture, an honest picture of why this is here, and the answer is, or the reason why we're doing this is CO2 emissions are a concern, and atmospheric CO2 levels are high and are a concern. And by doing practice A, B, and C, or changing this on your operation, we can take your soil carbon content from 100 tons to this many tons to whatever that number may be. And, we're an outcome-based program, and based on what you fix, we're going to measure and we're going to figure out what we can pay you for the tons that you sequester. So I guess I try to maybe materialize that amount and saying, we're not just paying you to do this. By doing this, you are going to generate tons, and we're going to pay you to sequester those tons into your soil. And then we are going, those offsets then get sold to these companies that are coming to the table, desires to hit sustainability measures. So I guess that's the approach I've taken, right, wrong, or indifferent, is trying to bring it to a material idea that, we're not just paying you to do this. This is going to generate these tons. And then that is what you are selling to generate these credits that you get paid for. But the beauty is, yes, we're buying the tons, but the tons stay with you. And by increasing your soil carbon, you're increasing your soil health and the sustainability of your operation. So, from my standpoint, it's not just a win-win. There's multiple wins in this ladder for a grower. And then looking into the future of this, I think the levels of opportunity of what they can maybe generate from income, it's very exciting. I think eventually we could see revenue streams outside of just the carbon market. I think we might see revenue streams where, I think we touched on it a few minutes ago, that these goods and services that are going to be produced under these measures are attractive to these buyers, and those buyers are going to be willing to pay a higher price or a premium to get these products. So it's not probably unthinkable that someday we don't see grain premiums on grains that are raised in these programs, and then a grower's looking at stacking multiple incentives. I feel that we're truly on the tip of the iceberg, as far as pricing and what monetarily can be gained from the grower. We are barely scraping the surface of what this probably is going to become in the next couple decades.
Yeah, there's still so much to learn, and that's what I think is kind of fun about this. You've mentioned, I think we've mentioned a couple times on the podcast already, kind of the Wild West. Travis, is it all rainbows and unicorns out there? Are there any disadvantages to participate in this carbon program?
Yeah, well, I always say, there's no such thing as a silver bullet technology. There's always a trade-off on particular practices. The one thing is some of the unknowns, some of the unknown challenges, and a steep learning curve. specifically when you get into no-till and cover cropping, which I like to see those in tandem. I believe one helps the other and the other helps out. But so steep learning curve, say, we look at things like compaction. There's some other, disadvantages like nutrient stratification, things of that nature. But there's some techniques that we can go through and bust that up and figure out different ways of doing that. And that's one of the benefits of a cover crop, right? Is helping out with that nutrient stratification. Also, getting some roots a little further, using tillage radishes, things of that nature. I think this carbon market has given Mark and I another chance to get out and have conversations and talk with growers and have some talks about the wisdom in one choice versus another. There's always a trade-off. We like to look at no-till and cover cropping as two of the main new practices that growers can adopt in order to get paid in the carbon market. Now, based on the environment, we have some good predictions based on where they're at, what county they're in, that we can say, there's the average number of sequestration rate in this area is so many tons per year. And that swings pretty widely with the environment. I've noticed that in particular areas that have, certain patterns of rainfall, there's going to be a particular amount of tonnage, and that doesn't move off the prediction very much based on driving, say, 200 miles. But if you were to say drive 200 miles east and propose the exact same cookie cutter approach, you may be laughed at. It depends on where you're at. So, we like to look at it as we are specially tailoring a plan for that producer.
Interesting. Mark, when you're out there, out in the field and you're at a conference, let's say, and someone is interested, or if they're listening to this podcast and they're interested in this carbon marketplace, who are the best producer candidates for a program like this? Who are the ones that are just going to be successful and do real well with it?
So I think at this point in time and where this market is at monetarily, the person that is going to be the happiest is the individual that has thought of this concept of changing their operation for a while. The grower that has a neighbor or a friend that has transitioned to no-till and is saying, hey man, this works. This is the way to do it, and did so, kind of how we did without this incentive out there. That the person that already has that desire or that even that slight interest in the back of their head that can now come to this as a resource to help them bridge that gap is the person that I come in contact with where I say, this is for you. This is for you to pay attention to. Because right now, when we look into the grand scheme of production cost, the carbon credit pay it's not a catastrophic amount, but it is significant. So there has to be, in my mind, that interest of that grower, and also just going into once the grower is signed, that person is going to go into that practice change with a level of optimism that may necessarily not be there if they hadn't had any interest in the actual practice change or increasing the health of their soil or the resilience of their operation.
Mark, one last question I have before we end this is, let's say that you convinced me and I am ready to pull the trigger and I want to get involved in this carbon marketplace. I want to do what's right for my farm. I see that the practices are going to be right for sustainability on my farm, and I'm going to make a little bit of money on the side by selling this carbon that I'm farming. What am I committing to? Am I going to have a whole bunch of people with lab coats coming out to my farm and digging holes and taking samples? And what am I committing to on my side?
I would say just to the general listener, whether they're looking at our contract or anybody's contract, read the contract, know exactly what you're signing into, know exactly what the length of the contract, the terms of the contract. Is this an outcome-based payment, or are we paying a certain dollar amount per acre on a practice change annually? know what contract you are signing, because there is variation across this industry right now. So yeah, that would be number one. As far as our contract goes, so we're going to establish a baseline. We're going to test year one, establish a baseline of what we have as far as soil organic carbon. And then we have a couple different routes as far as what we can do as far as prepayments or no prepayments. And then we plan to sample at year 5 and settle up on the exact amount of carbon that was sequestered in the soil. And then also at year 10, we'll sample again. The contract length is 10 years. With 3 sample periods, and we pay on the actual tonnage of carbon that is sequestered. So as far as the grower's involvement and what's needed, there is a level of data that we need, historic data of what was done in those fields. I think that's truly the beauty of what we're doing here at Agoro is we've established a network of individuals, agronomists, customer service that really want to work with the growers and walk them through this process. They're not just signing up, getting on their computer and having to walk through the process on their own. We have a team that's there to help them along the way.
So the best thing is if you're thinking that this may make sense to you and not quite sure, Travis, Mark, and the team of the Agoro is willing to sit down with you. They want to sit down and figure out what's best for you. The best way to get a hold of Travis and Mark and the team of Agoro agronomists is go to agorocarbonalliance.com, or you can call the number 888-68-CARBON. And if you're driving down the road, don't be making notes. It'll be in the show notes of the podcast, so you can wait until you get to a safe place. Anywhere else can they go to learn more about carbon, Travis and Mark?
Yeah, go to our website and check that out. There's a learning center that they can look up. There's a collection of articles. This is the Wild West, but we've thought about this, and so we've put together a collection of materials that people can read. I do caution Googling the carbon market because
there's some things that aren't quite true out there, Travis.
Some misleading information, or it's dated.
Good point. Well, thank you, guys. You've been listening to the Agoro Carbon Farming Podcast, where we bring you knowledge on how to sustainably and profitably transform farming through carbon cropping. To learn more about how you can become a partner, visit us at agorocarbonalliance.com or follow us on our many social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn.